So the beginning salvation experience, I can tell you the event, and because it happened when I was 8 years old. And so as I'm looking now, some 65 years later, it's more of a commentary than it is perhaps an explanation. And I think the commentary will key around two words, and that's the word draw and come. And it deals with the Father's drawing me to Jesus. And then because of that draw, then the capacity to be able to come to Jesus. Happened over a series, I remember a series of like 3 weeks. And of course, with my mom, who had brought me up in the church, my dad being Jewish and my mom being a believer, learned the details of the gospel from birth. But then in a series of 3 weeks, I began to sense something that as an 8-year-old boy I could not explain. But looking back in a commentary, I was being drawn by the Father to see Jesus as someone who was cherished. It happened as an interim pastor was preaching on the Gadarene demoniac, and I began to realize that I needed more than just the plan of salvation. But God just opened in my heart the reality that there was something deep within me that was defiled. And with that, I saw Jesus in a new light as one to whom I would cherish. And with that, then I came to Jesus Christ. And the drawing and the coming climaxed in, as you can imagine, in great, great joy. My call to the ministry, the event occurred a year later at what was junior camp at Mount Lebanon Baptist encampment outside of Dallas. It was an evening service, and I heard a question that I had not heard before. Oftentimes as a child, people come to you and they ask you, what do you want to be, or what do you want to do when you grow up? The question I heard had nothing to do with my desires, but it had to do with the reality, what does God want you to do? And I remember particularly being ministered to by the stories of Jeremiah and the stories of Samuel. Jeremiah, who later in his ministry would say, I know the plans I have for you, was the very one who in the beginning of his ministry heard from God that God says, before you were born, I knew you. And so it became not what I want to do, but it became then, why has God created me? The Samuel story was helpful because, as you can imagine, as a 9-year-old boy, how clearly can you hear the voice of the Lord? And just like Samuel in his series of being awakened and hearing his name called, and confused whether or not that was, or who it was, and of course thinking it was Eli, and trying to discern whether the call that I heard was from some other outside force, some other individuals, or whether it was from God. And then it just became confirmed in my heart that it was the Lord who had called me into the ministry. I was so grateful that the church that I was a part of nurtured that call, discipled me. They gave me opportunities when I was 12 years old for the first time to stand behind the pulpit. Well, really, not just to stand behind the pulpit, because I've always been a little vertically challenged. And so they got an apple crate, and I stood on it, and then at 12, then delivered my first sermon. It was, as you can imagine, it was quite shorter than my sermons are today. But then they continued in ministry opportunities. So grateful for Northway Baptist Church, and they're investing in my life. As I reflected upon that question and reflected upon ministering to a specific congregation for over 4 decades, I began to try to look back and try to identify what those might be. And so here's what I came up with. I decided to avoid the question because I thought, what if I put something forward? This is my greatest accomplishment. And then when I stand before the Lord, only to see that, no, Dennis, that was just wood, hay, and stubble, and have that consumed. So instead of answering that question directly, let me share what I would hope that my greatest accomplishment would be. And that would be that I shepherded well the flock that Christ had purchased or has purchased with his own blood. And that I led them well, I tended them, I cared for them. So I would hope that my greatest accomplishment would be that I have tended the flock well, and that I would be able to say, as Christ says in John 17, Father, I have glorified you while upon the earth, having accomplished the work that you have given me to do. I would share with them, focus on your cross and not on your crown. And I would also share with them, and don't shepherd alone. The image of the cross and the crown, both are realities in our spiritual walk. But the reality in ministry and in a life of ministry, as we do it now, is not as much about a crown as it is about a cross. And particularly the cost of the cross. Many periods in my ministry in which the cost of cross-bearing was great to me, and heavy and costly emotionally. In fact, I remember when I was 55 years old and I was going through one of those cost periods of my ministry, and I wrote to a dear brother, and I said to my brother, I don't know if I can endure another 10 years. Of course, 65 being the year of retirement. All I was saying by that, I don't know if I can endure long enough to bow out gracefully. But so grateful for the ministry of the Lord. One of the truths that he began to work in my life was Paul's statement in Acts chapter 20, where he says, but I do not count my life of any value, nor as precious to myself, if only I may finish my course and the ministry that I received from the Lord Jesus Christ. So with that, my counsel would be, keep your focus on your cross and not on the crown. Remembering what Jesus says in John chapter 5 to the Pharisees, the reason why you do not believe is because you are more interested in the praise of man than you are in the glory of the Lord. And the second counsel to be, do not shepherd alone. All through my ministry, I've been blessed with a deacon body that knows what it is to serve the body and to be fellowship builders within the body. But for many years, I pastored as a lead pastor in a structured staff organization. But then the Lord led me to be able to see the glory of having men come alongside me, other elders come alongside of me, and perhaps the greatest blessing to be able to endure and to shepherd the flock of God is that a group of men, 4 other men, joined me as elders of the Hills Church, and that together we were able then to shepherd and to lead the people of God. My funniest ministry story happened at a wedding where I was that close to kicking the bride out of the wedding. The bride had walked down the aisle with her father, and then I began to hear this music. And it was like a cell phone going off, and music was going on and on, and so I waited for a second for someone to get the idea and cut it off, and it wouldn't, and that went on for what seemed to be an eternity. It was probably only about 30 seconds, but the music just continued. It continued at the same level, the same pitch, and then I was just ready to ask whoever it is that was not honoring the wedding. I was about to say, whoever you are, would you please leave? At that time, it stopped. And you know what it was? It was the bride's garter that had one of those sound buttons. And evidently, when she walked down the aisle, her knees clicked together and the music began to resound. And so I was about that close to kicking her out of her own wedding.